Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squared for boxing news and views from around the internet. This is the post-fight review for South African heavyweight Kevin Lerena against the Polish heavyweight and veteran Mariusz Wach. This fight took place in South Africa. Kevin Lerena, a very worthy winner, unanimous decision. Maybe the cards didn't reflect the effort of Mariusz Wach, so it was 118, 110, 120, 108 on two scorecards. And as I said on Twitter, I thought 120 to 108 was very cruel because Mariusz Wach did give Kevin Lerena some good early rounds, and I think arguably he did win some. So what we'll do is we'll start with the post-fight comments and then move on to a few other thoughts and some of the action proper, because Kevin Lerena has moved up. This was a second fight at the weight. First one was against Bogdan Dinu, but you can't take too much from that one because Dinu likes to fall down after 3 or 4 rounds. This was a proper test against a veteran heavyweight with noted durability. And I guess some people will say Mariusz Wach in his 40s now, should Lerena have stopped him? Well, not everyone can stop Mariusz Wach. So Kevin Lerena definitely does have pop, but maybe not, that concussive one-punch power. But certainly he was sniping in this fight with the left hand and having great success. So what we'll do, we'll get to his thoughts first. So after the fight, he described Mariusz Wach as a tough competitor and that he'd learnt so much from this fight. And he said, I'm ready for the big boys, that this was a legitimate heavyweight and I hurt him multiple times. Well, I guess the thing is he landed multiple times and there were some big shots rocking Wach's head back. But with Mariusz Wach, it's always a little tough to tell, was he actually hurt, because he's got such a good poker face. But certainly accuracy from Lerena when he was landing that left hand in particular, it was good in this fight. But he did go on to say as well, and this was a little bit later, he wanted to get this out there after a few other people had spoken, which I'll get to. He said, don't ever question my chin. And I'm not really sure this was the fight that would have shown us either way how good his chin is, because Mariusz Wach is not a huge puncher, not a noted knockout puncher. I mean, Lerena, he ate some decent shots, but Wach was on the 1-2 early. But apart from that, the second half of the fight, it was all Kevin Lerena as Mariusz Wach tied. And we'll come to that in a moment. But interestingly, his promoter, Rodney Berman, said that Lerena is going to have a couple of more fights in South Africa. He says, we've got to fight here in front of his fanatical fans. Give me 2 more fights and he will be mentioned with names like Joshua and Wilder. And I was watching the Polish version of the commentary. They had the English in the background, so I missed a couple of things. So maybe he mentioned Fury as well. But the thing is, I guess 2 fights in South Africa, it's a little bit out of sight, out of mind. Lerena can certainly build his stock and his profile, but it's going to need to be against good names. I mean, someone like a Carlos Takam, that would be a good opponent. But to say that in 2 fights he'll be mentioned in the same breath as guys like Joshua and Wilder, I'm not convinced, unless it's against legitimate names. And they're going to need to pay some big sums to get them out to South Africa, where Rodney Berman wants them to be fighting Kevin Lerena. But his trainer also said, Peter Smith, that they are going to the top. And sort of what I heard, and actually the show itself reminded me of a lot of the sort of dinner shows that Joseph Parker had on his come up, and some of those were on pay-per-view and, lots of dinner tables, and then there would be crowd sections as well. They just had that sort of vibe about it. So it was an event where they're trying to make money off the event and obviously the broadcasting side of it too. But can Kevin Lerena go to the top? Well, it's certainly a question. This fight, all it tells us is that he is a legitimate heavyweight. I think it sort of shakes off that cruiserweight tag, the sort of stink of it. What we had with this fight was 2 halves of the fight. The final 6 rounds, Kevin Lerena just raced away with it. As soon as Mariusz Wach's gas tank hit E, and that was after about 5 or so rounds, Kevin Lerena from round 6 to 12 dominated, really did, sniping in with the left hand. He also paid attention to Wach's body in rounds sort of 6 and 7, and Wach didn't like it. And what you had was Wach bringing his hands down and starting to get clipped more consistently in the second half of the fight with the left hand. Later in the fight as well, because Wach was so tired, he just couldn't really defend himself like he could in those earlier rounds. The hands were down and he was open to being hit. We saw a few flashy combinations coming in. There was one triple left hand in quick succession, which was really nice. There was another 3-punch combo. I think it was a left, right, uppercut. Very nice work. But early on, and this is, I think, where we need to sort of talk about the what next for Kevin Lerena. He was having a few issues, but he was also being patient. You had Mariusz Wach, the much bigger man, and this is going to be something that Lerena's going to have to be wary of going forward. A lot of his opponents, especially at the top level, are going to be guys who are 6'4" to 6'6". Kevin Lerena, what is he, 6'1", 6'2"? There was 5 or 6 inches in difference in height here. And for certain rounds early on, Mariusz Wach was able to make that count. When he kept it long and was just throwing the jab and the 1-2, he was having success. Sure, some of it was being blocked by Kevin Lerena and his guard, but some of it was getting through and some of it was scoring. And of the first, 5 rounds or 6 rounds, I had it even after 6 rounds, because for me in those early rounds, what we saw was Mariusz Wach just outworking Kevin Lerena, who was guilty at times of sort of standing off, looking for one punch, but in between looking for that punch, he wasn't really doing a lot. And that'll be a danger going forward, because he won't be able to just try to do that against bigger guys who have more of a gas tank and control him at the back of, the end of their jab. And as soon as Mariusz Wach in this fight, early rounds, as soon as he collapsed the distance and allowed things to get close, that's when Lerena was able to have his moments of success in those early rounds. We saw later in the fight, Lerena was sniping and sort of hitting Wach at will, but early on, it was a bit tough, it was a challenge, and it was a little hard to overcome. And I thought that on the basis of activity and volume, Mariusz Wach was picking up some of the early rounds. But, admittedly as well, some of these were quite close as well. So I can see a situation where 1 to 2 rounds for Wach, but I can't give him any more than the 3 rounds that I gave him in this fight. I had it 9-3. After 6, I thought the fight was even. And obviously, Kevin Lerena just bossed the second half of the fight. But obviously, being a smaller man, he's going to have to, going forward, try to get to the inside and get his work away. He was happy in stretches in the first half of the fight to sit at the end of Mariusz Wach's jab and didn't seem to have a lot of success trying to close the distance. But I think part of the strategy with this one as well was, look, Mariusz Wach's probably got 5 or 6 good rounds in him. We'll just let him work away and basically, expend the energy reserves that he's got, and then we'll take the fight over. And that's exactly what happened in the end. And Lerena from round 6 to about 8, really started to put it on Mariusz Wach and start bossing the fight completely. I think round 9, he might have sort of had a bit of a rest round, but after that, he just continued to do what he was doing and, picking up rounds. And it's not like he was throwing 100 punches around or anything like that, but obviously later in the fight, it was much easier to land, and Wach just didn't have the wherewithal to keep him off him. But early on, Mariusz Wach and Kevin Lerena, it was a very sort of back and forth fight. Wach having some success, Lerena looking for those one-off shots. So it'll be interesting what they do next, because we've seen Mariusz Wach, he was against Aslanbek Makhmudov, his last fight out. He was stopped in 6 or 7 rounds. And I know some people might go, well, is there a comparison? Can we draw something from it? I mean, Makhmudov just sort of, once Wach tired, and Wach took rounds off Makhmudov as well. Makhmudov, who typically, not in his last fight against Carlos Takam, but in other fights like the Wach one, was just all over Mariusz Wach with volume and just trying to batter him into submission. I don't think Kevin Lerena can fight like that, because he's a smaller heavyweight, but he's also very heavily muscled. And I think there were different points in the fight where you could see he was managing his energy reserves very carefully. And I think when he sort of expends, if he was to go into full on just trying to take a guy out, throw 15, 20 punches, I think he's the sort of fighter that would need a round or 2 to recover. So he was a lot of one-off stuff. Later in the fight, he'd throw a 2 or 3 punch combination together, but he was working within himself as well. So I think going forward, there certainly is the risk against certain fighters that he could get outworked and as a result outpointed. but also the next couple of fights, if it's in South Africa, how do they build from this? What's the sort of name? I mean, I think someone like Carlos Takam would be perfect. It would be a good yardstick. We've just seen Takam give Arslanbek Makhmudov a very tough fight. Took, 4 or 5 rounds off him, despite also being dropped. But if you're going to sort of get to that next echelon, I mean, he says, Kevin Lerena, that he's ready for the big boys. Well, you've got to face some of these requisite tests on the way up. I think a guy like Carlos Takam sort of fits that bill. Because where else do you go? I mean, there's no point bringing in guys that are sort of outside the top 50 at this point. If you're saying within a couple of fights you're ready to be in the same league as Anthony Joshua, Deontay Wilder, etc., well, you've got to put the work in now to actually show that you deserve to be considered among that same company. I think even despite those claims from the promoter, Rodney Berman, I think given he's fighting in South Africa, out of sight, out of mind, and if the opposition is, continues to be, let's face it, Mariusz Wach is a 40-something faded veteran, that continues to be guys that are completely faded from their primes, how much credit will people be willing to give him? At least with a Carlos Takam, for example, what his level is and how much he's still got left. We knew that Mariusz Wach is durable and tough, but he was a guy we've seen fade in other fights more recently. But still a good sort of, name recognition, showcase fight for Kevin Lerena to prove to people, look, I am a legitimate heavyweight. And it served its purpose, this fight, to sort of get people to go, okay, Lerena, he is actually real. He's a guy who can do something in the heavyweight division. But I guess, where's his level going to be? Who can they match him with? And, how quickly can they get him to meaningful fights? And the sort of, because now he needs to get some rankings, he needs to get in eliminators, all that sort of stuff, but they're going to need to match him probably reasonably tough to get him where they need him to be, especially if they're saying they want him in the same company as, the names mentioned before. But good rounds for Kevin Lerena. He's not going to be able to stop everyone at heavyweight, but certainly he fought well and seemed to fight well to a game plan for the most part, especially, from the mid-rounds on, and working the body and sniping with the left hand. Maybe the right hook could use a bit of development, because it was sort of one hand happy in terms of looking for left almost exclusively at times. But decent performance overall. What do you make of it all? Drop a comment loud and often. Hit like, hit subscribe. Follow me on Twitter, boxing_squared. I'm out.